Welcome to a special anniversary edition of PAPERI Bright Minds, where we spotlight pioneers shaping the future of genomics, precision medicine, and global health. As PAPERI celebrates 1 year of impact, we are honored to feature a trailblazer in African bioinformatics, Professor Dr. Nicola Mulder. In this special interview, Professor Mulder sits down with Dr. Verena Ras.
So hello everyone, and welcome to the PAPERI Bright Minds series, where we celebrate and learn from exceptional individuals driving advancements in genetics, genomics, healthcare, and beyond across Africa and globally. I am Verena Ras, and it's an honor to have you join us today. Today, we are thrilled to welcome the brilliant Professor Nicola Mulder, who heads the Computational Biology Division at the University of Cape Town. She previously led HCA BioNet, a Pan-African bioinformatics network of 28 institutions across 17 countries, which developed bioinformatics capacity to enable genomic data analysis through an extensive training program for African researchers. She's currently the PI of the DSI Africa Alwazi Open Data Science Platform and also co-leads a Sickle Cell Disease Data Coordinating Center, as well as a Wellcome Trust Discovery Data Integration Platform at UCT. She received a PhD in medical microbiology from the University of Cape Town and then worked for about 8.5 years at the European Bioinformatics Institute in Cambridge as a team leader. Her research focuses on genetic determinants of susceptibility to disease, African genome variation, and microbial genomics and infectious diseases from both the host and pathogen perspectives. Her group provides bioinformatics services and training and develops new algorithms and resources for the analysis of complex African genomic data. Professor Mulder is actively involved in capacity development, including training, education, and curriculum development in bioinformatics. She also sits on a number of international scientific advisory boards. So in this session, we will explore Professor Nicola Mulder's journey, her contributions to bioinformatics, and the lessons they've learned along the way, or rather that she's learned along the way. So Nikki, if you are ready, we'll go to the first question. So these are a couple of general background questions to set the scene for the webinar. And I'll go straight to the first question. So Nikki, can you share with us your journey into bioinformatics and what led you to focus on genomics research in Africa?
Sure. So thank you for the invitation to be part of this. So my journey was a bit weird because I actually was going to be an artist the whole way through school, and only towards the end of school did I suddenly decide that science sounded very cool. So I went into science, and I actually majored in chemistry and microbiology, and then I did a PhD in medical microbiology. And at the end of that, I was working on the some TB genes, and the genome had just come out, and so there was suddenly a whole lot of bioinformatics analysis required. And so I got into that. This was the old days when Blast was still done on CDs, but I really enjoyed it. And so then instead of going to do a postdoc in the lab, I actually went to work directly at the European Bioinformatics Institute. I was working as a curator then, and then got involved in a protein family database and ended up running that, and then become just really enthralled by bioinformatics, and that was me sold. I was never going to pick up a pipette again.
And I'm pretty sure the community is happy that you transitioned into bioinformatics, all the amazing things you've done across the continent and the world. Thank you very much. So the next question is, you've played a major role in shaping bioinformatics capacity across Africa. What inspired you to lead these efforts?
Well, when I came back to South Africa after being at the EBI in Cambridge for 8.5 years, I saw a big difference in what was available in terms of capacity. That's local infrastructure, but as well as the skills. And yet there was so much enthusiasm. And so when I was interacting with students, I saw this real need and desire to learn and to do bioinformatics. And so I was really inspired to be able to help build that capacity. So I had my own students, and then I started working through various projects and through the ASBCB, the African Society for Bioinformatics and Computational Biology. There I met a lot of people across the continent. And we just sort of got involved in initiatives that needed bioinformatics capacity in order to be successful. And so we had to get that capacity developed in order to actually do quite a lot of the projects. So it was really just based on the need, and then building that as we required it until we actually got proper funding to do this on a large scale.
Thank you. And just on the topic of projects and capacity development in Africa, I'd like to go to the next question, and just start by saying that you are obviously incredibly instrumental and have been instrumental in leading HA Bionet over the years. I'd like to ask you if you could reflect on its impact on African genomics research.
Yeah, so I think H3 Bionet was, as I said, we were very lucky to get funding. We'd been talking about building bioinformatics capacity, and then having this funding really allowed us to take action on that. I think the biggest impact has been building critical mass in across the continent in bioinformatics. I think previously people were quite dispersed, and this network really helped to bring people together and make them feel that they belong to something, and we're working towards specific deliverables. And I think a lot of bioinformatics learning is actually done on the job. So you can go to many training courses, but it's when you're actually implementing projects that you really learn, and particularly when you're doing that with a multidisciplinary team. So I think the hackathons, all these events, the training and working together on projects really help to build capacity, specific skills across the continent. I mean, bioinformatics is such a broad field. You say I've got skills in bioinformatics, but in what in bioinformatics? So I think we've got a really broad group of skilled people with different skills across the continent. So it's really building that capacity in terms of the people, but also the infrastructure. So we actually put in computing infrastructure in various places. We looked at the networking. So all of the tools that you need to actually be able to do bioinformatics, as well as the skills, so that when you learn the skills, you've actually got a place that you can actually work on and implement those skills. So I think it was the biggest impact was bringing people together, making them feel like they belong to something, and then building the skills together and building capacity where there was nothing to start with.
Yeah, and I think the progress over the last decade has been amazing, to say the least. And so just chatting a little bit about your experiences with HA Bionet, what would you say are some of the biggest challenges you faced in building such a Pan-African bioinformatics network? And can you maybe just comment a little bit about how you might have overcome some of those challenges?
I think the biggest challenge was that we were starting from an area where there was huge demand and not very much on the ground. So with simple things like the procuring equipment, because we were doing this across multiple sites, it allowed us to get really good discounts. So we could do that. Because we had common challenges, we could address those challenges together. So that helped to, and we did a lot of pooling of resources. I think when you don't have a lot of resources, you become very resourceful and you work out how much you can do with very little. And so we managed to do that. But I think on the other side, some of the biggest challenges were trying to keep people involved, because there were groups that were kind of weaker in bioinformatics that wanted to be involved but didn't feel they could contribute. And so it was hard to get those people involved. So how do you give them a task that they can feel like they're meaningfully contributing without feeling like they, are kind of intimidated or left behind? As with any network or big collaboration or consortium, you're always going to get a few people who do everything, and then many people who don't do much. So it was really hard to balance the load and the burden on some people. And I think that is the nature of every consortium. Some people, just take a bigger load. And so what we tried to do then is reward people that did take on bigger loads. So they would get fellowships, they'd get to go to meetings, they'd get more projects and that. So there were ways to overcome that, but there's still always those challenges.
Yeah. And I think you've spoken a little bit about the capacity development in general that you've done across Africa. And so it's very clear that HA Bionet as an organization contributed very significantly to the training of African scientists. With HA Bionet's funding now having ended very recently, how do you see that legacy potentially continuing into the future?
Yeah, we know that we have to continue, because even when HJ Ban had finished and we thought, okay, we've got to run IBT again. This is our introduction to bioinformatics training course. Again, immediately 9,000 applications. So we know that the demand is not going away. So we just towards the end of the HJ Ban grant, we got a grant as the DSI consortium, the STIP, or Harnessing Data Science for Health in Africa, to run an open data science platform. So through that, we've been managing to maintain some of the training, and then we got another NH grant to build African resources. So we trying to sort of use the skills that we have. We've also tried to increase our sustainability by training other people to do these courses. So we've had train the trainer courses, so that it's not just relying on us and our funding, that other people in different regions in Africa can actually take this on and run their own courses, and that's been successful. And the IBT this year, we've got regional courses. But also we've now got funding for the African Bioinformatics Institute. And that, I think, is going to be a major step towards sustainability of ABR training, bioinformatics training across the continent, because it's an organization that's beyond just human. It doesn't have deliverables for a specific project. The remit is to build capacity generally for bioinformatics. So that's the natural home, I think, for all future training in bioinformatics that can cut across all life sciences.
And the next question was actually on the African Bioinformatics Institute and its mission and how it builds on HA Bio and its foundation. But I think you've already pretty much answered that for us. So I'll go into the next question, which is probably, to me, a very tricky question. So we've discussed a little bit about the contributions that your teams have made in training sort of the next generation of African bioinformaticians. And this is a very loaded question. I'll start by saying that. What skills do you think are most critical for them today?
Data science. So, everybody, the funders, governments, everybody talking about AI. So I think if you don't have fundamental data science skills, so I think you can implement AI without having, major programming skills, because there are some tools to do that. But really, a bioinformatician should have foundational skills. To me, the foundational skills are some data manipulation, whether that's sort of Linux or Shell or some programming language, basic statistics, because you've got to understand the data. Bioinformatics is working with big data now. And that comes with statistical issues and power and all of that sort of stuff. So you need basic data science skills, which is the statistics, the programming, and AI.
Great. So then to follow on from just this topic, obviously many African institutions are now starting to offer bioinformatics degree and training programs. Maybe not called a bioinformatics degree necessarily, but some realm of bioinformatics is being offered by several institutions now. So just based on the answer that you've just given about the critical skills for current, bioinformaticians, what gaps might you say need to be addressed by institutions at the moment?
So I think we still don't have enough degree programs, and we need to train for specific. So we need those foundational skills if you're doing undergraduate training. For postgraduate degrees, we maybe need to do a bit more targeted training. So, for example, a lot of the bioinformaticians we train, that doesn't get to the public health side. And so maybe we need some more public health bioinformatics, for example, or, specific applications of bioinformatics. The degrees also need to keep up with new technologies. So you can't keep the same training materials, that you had 10 years ago, where we were having macroarrays and now we're doing RNA-seq and now we're doing AI. So I think the universities really need to work together to think about keeping the curriculum up to date. The methods change, the pipelines change, everything changes so fast. So they need to work together with that. But I think also it's the faculty. So there's all very well to have the curriculum in place and these courses in place, but you need trained faculty. And then we don't have enough high quality bioinformatics researchers, academic researchers across the continent. So we need to be building those, take the next generation to build them to the next kind of professors in bioinformatics. Because they also need to oversee supervision of projects, postgraduate projects. And if they don't understand the field, then they can't properly supervise. So we need to build that faculty layer and then make sure that curriculum is relevant to the application they need, but also up to date.
Yeah, 100% agree. And so then, given the rapid pace of technological advancements, which you've also just mentioned with your answer, the rapid advancements in genomics and AI specifically, how do you see bioinformatics training adapting to sort of keep pace with these rapid advancements?
Well, I mean, so we're using AI actually for the training process. So we've got a new project that is actually looking at how we implement AI to build the curriculum, to design the content, to create the content, to assess people, to do evaluations, to create learning paths and everything. So I think AI can come into the actual training process. But in terms of the curriculum, we obviously need these basic skills, so any basic foundational skills that you need to be able to implement AI. And then also, what are the methods that are kind of current for different applications? But I think what's also important to teach when you're teaching the, AI is the ethics around it. So how do you do this responsibly? Not only in terms of the environment, but also in terms of how you responsibly use the data. How do you protect the data? How do you determine when something's going to give you an accurate result, or you're actually going to end up with propagating wrong data, wrong results. So I think that is a big component that we need to include in the curricula. But I think, all students from the honors level up, they are all starting to use AI, and the tools use AI. So people need to have a fundamental understanding of what that is all about, what the quality of the data is, because obviously garbage in equals garbage out. What do you need for that? And which then brings in data stewardship, so there are a lot of things around AI, in terms of the ethics, that getting the data preparation, etc., that need to come into the curricula these days.
Mm-mm. Yeah, and I think it's quite clear that while AI represents many opportunities, it comes with its own set of challenges and logistical issues as well. And I think more and more people, the more they try and integrate AI into training, the more they're starting to realize it creates this whole other world of problems and ethics and and. But I think it's an exciting space nonetheless to be in. And I'm excited to see what your group especially does with this over the coming years. So I think this conversation actually segues quite well into the next couple of questions, which more deals with sort of the genomics and health research specifically that you've been undertaking across Africa. And so you've worked on African genome variation and infectious diseases. What would you say has been some of the most significant findings from your research?
I guess it's nothing new, but I think there's just the enormous variation that we have in African genomes, but also the regional variation. So the variation is showing us it's giving us more information about migration patterns and that, which now impact how you treat people in those countries, because you have to think about that when you are treating a population that is now completely mixed. So it's telling us how people have moved across the continent, how the exposure to infectious diseases, for example, has shaped the genomes of the African people, but very differently across the continent. So even within a country, we're seeing major variation. And so I think it's highlighting to us what's important, that it's very important to sort of look at population and ancestry when you are thinking about any kind of genomic research. We've also, a lot of the GWAS have identified some novel variants, so it might be it might be in the same gene as you're finding in Europeans, but definitely different variants, sometimes even different genes, but in the same kind of pathways. So we're finding novel variants. We're finding that some of the clinical variants that people have said are pathogenic in other populations are actually reasonably common in ours. So can they be really pathogenic? Are we reshaping the curation and our understanding of kind of world clinical variants and how people should be looking at these? And then also when we're doing our pan-genome work, we also identifying novel regions in African genomes, because we have this huge variation, and this again varies across the continent. So the biggest kind of pointer is it is not one country. This is a huge continent with multiple different ancestries, and we're going to have different findings across the continent. So I think it's been really interesting unpacking the regional variation across the continent.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so I think you have made some amazing strides in infectious disease, non-communicable diseases, personalized medicine across your network. What would you then say are maybe some of the most promising bioinformatics-driven discoveries in African genetics and disease susceptibility?
So I guess everything that we do in this field is got a bioinformatics component because data is the core. There's obviously the extremely important clinical trials and the research and the patient facing and experimental work, but ultimately it starts with the data and the data interpretation. So I think any discovery has the bioinformatics component to it. So I think we've got a lot of discoveries directly from the way the data have been interpreted. So bioinformatics, the visualization of data helps to improve how you understand and interpret the data. The tools themselves, obviously, if you don't have the right tools for the right data, you're not going to get the right discoveries. But I think I think bioinformatics kind of underpins everything in all life sciences because it's all data related. So the advances in these bioinformatics tools, I think, have and them being able to keep up with the new technologies, which have new data types, which have new curation and have new quality control challenges. I think those are important that the bioinformatics tools have kept up with it, but also it's the visualization that allows the clinician or the researcher to be able to actually interpret that data.
Mm-hmm. And so it's very clear that bioinformatics, AI, data-driven research is becoming more and more valuable, more and more important. And it's more and more important that more African researchers are able to access these sorts of skills. But of course, we do know that many researchers still struggle with access to computational infrastructure as well as funding in order to fund some of this infrastructure and capacity development. How have your networks perhaps overcome some of these challenges, or what advice could you give to others who want to venture out into this field about overcoming some of these common barriers?
So I think this is one of the biggest challenges because infrastructure is something that's not always in our power to control. So, you rely on an institutional infrastructure, you rely on the government's electricity, you rely on networks. So sometimes those are very difficult to control, but we can mitigate this. So for example, in H3 Bionet, when there were internet challenges, we actually used these eBio kits, which are these standalone kits that you have all your databases and all your tools on there. As the data and the tools are getting more complex, that's not necessarily feasible because you are going to need HPCs, so you are going to need that infrastructure. So I think pooling resources, sharing with others, so engaging with your IT department, engaging with the computational, the computer science department, and working together. But I think also African researchers should think more about engaging with technology companies. So actually engage with cloud companies, engage with your NRENs, your national research networks, because actually sometimes they are very willing to help you solve those challenges. You just don't know who to contact. So we've had that experience. So it is a very difficult challenge, but I think there are ways to think about what is your unique situation and how to overcome that. Even with our courses, many people have been doing courses on their mobile phones. So I think there are ways, and as I said, when you don't have many resources, you tend to be very resourceful. So I think people just need to think out of the box. If there's something you can't control in terms of major infrastructure, then think of an alternative. But engagement with these companies, I think, is actually quite useful because they are willing to contribute and to see and how they can help to address these challenges as well.
And I think that's amazing advice as well. So I think it's very clear that there's a bit of a disparity at the moment in terms of the ability to access infrastructure funding and then the ability to obviously interpret genomic data within those regions or countries or institutions. As a result, there is there is increased attention on genomics data governance and ethical considerations, which you've mentioned earlier in this interview. What steps based on your knowledge, are being taken to ensure ethical and equitable data sharing in Africa? I know this is something that's very near and dear to your heart. Being a member of HA Bionet in the past, I understand how important and passionate you are about ethical and equitable data sharing. So what steps can you talk to that are being undertaken to ensure this?
So there are different frameworks that are being developed. So, there's the AU framework for the use of AI. Years ago, there was a framework under the African Academy of Sciences for the, ethical use of data. And I think for us, it differs a little bit from the North in that we try to include things like benefit sharing in our data governance and our ethics. In East Africa, we did a lot of engagement with the actual ethics committees from different countries and different institutions. And also now with these new data protection laws that have been coming in, we've been looking at those and navigating those. And the DSI Consortium, the ethical groups there, they've had legal representation. And so that's been really useful for the legal interpretation of these laws and how we match that with the ethics and things. But I think it's really important that Africa is at the table for policy discussions. When you have global policies that everyone's expected to adhere to, everybody needs to be at the table, and so often those discussions are had without us. So we need to make sure that we're at the table. We need to make sure that we talk to our governments, that we align with these policies. We also need to make sure we've got the technical capability to implement the policy. So if it says you need to do open science, responsible open science with access, controlled access, do we have a technical implementation that allows that? There are many other initiatives. So Nicola Mulder from UWC has got this ADVEX database where they're trying to say what data sets are out there and how do we negotiate an equitable access to that with benefit sharing, collaboration, etc. I think there are a lot of activities that are trying to work on making sure that African data, which is extremely valuable, is as available as possible, but in a responsible way that there is sort of feedback and benefit sharing back to those who generated the data.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I think it's quite clear that ethics, data governance, the conversation is really progressing quite fast now. And in some cases, it's quite mature, but we still know that African researchers still face several data sovereignty challenges, where often genetic data is analyzed outside of the content for some of the reasons that you've mentioned: low capacity, no access to infrastructure. And so they are often forced to collaborate, sometimes to get this data analyzed and to feed back to their communities. What are some of the ways that perhaps your group have overcome some of these challenges in retaining ownership of data? And what advice could you maybe give to other African countries or institutes around the retaining of ownership and IP of genomic data, which is very important?
So this is, in East Africa, this was sort of achieved by giving, the funders were more generous in the amount of time that you could take before you actually submitted the data to public resources for sharing, so that there was time for the local researchers to actually analyze the data, get any potential IP out of that. We're busy working on a big genome sequencing project, and this is a kind of a reasonably novel interaction with industry, where we're trying to make sure that there's benefit sharing and there we're putting, reasonable embargo on the use of the data for any, IP or publications to enable the researcher to do that. And at the same time, building capacity so that not only do we say you've got time to do it, but here are the skills to be able to do it. Some of the other ways we're doing this is having more local repositories. So there's the Nomad for genome variation database in the US, which is quite global. They were asked, East Africa researchers were asked to submit their data there, but they were not comfortable with doing that because they feel like they lose ownership of it. So we created the African genome variation database, which should be completely interoperable with Nomad, but it's now African owned, and they're much more comfortable putting it in there because it gives it the African ownership. And makes you immediately recognize, okay, should I be recognizing these authors? And so having more local repositories, we had discussions with the INSTC to have a local INSTC in Africa, a local EGA. And I think all of these will help to balance the sovereignty and the ownerships and the perception of African owned and led versus still being globally kind of sharing and globally relevant and interoperable with global databases. So those are some of the ways that we're trying to do that.
Yeah, those are some very interesting techniques. And I think what I get from your answer is really African-led solutions. And that is, I think, what is very important is that African scientists lead these solutions, develop them themselves, and develop them with an African perspective in mind. The African landscape is obviously very different to, I think, the European landscape, the Western landscapes. So it's very important that the solutions are topical for Africa. Um, so we are coming towards the end of the interview at the moment, and so now I'm going to ask a couple of loaded questions again. I want to ask you, based on everything we've just discussed today, what your vision for the future of bioinformatics in Africa is. So let's time about it, and let's say over the next 10 to 20 years, what is your personal goal or vision for bioinformatics in Africa?
So I would like to see it grow even further. So we've grown it as much as we can through H Africa in the human genomics field, in the countries that we happen to have a node in or a site in. I'd like to see the countries that have nothing, but they have a champion there that really wants to get bioinformatics going. And we've had contact from many countries that really want to get it started. So I'd like to see those countries grow with the help of others. So they shouldn't be left just to try to do this on their own. I think we should all work to get people up to capacity. I'd like to see 54 countries with bioinformatics, at least some bioinformatics happening in them. I know there's some countries with conflict in that where they've got other priorities. But I'd also like to see that bioinformatics is embedded in everything we do in the life sciences, that it's not an afterthought. People think about, your research and you do your experiment. Oh, and then let's analyze the data. It's not an afterthought. It is a core component of anything we do in the life sciences. So I think that mindset, people recognize the importance of the data component, the importance of bioinformatics in that. I would also like to see, my vision is that the government understands bioinformatics and the value of bioinformatics, because that's the only way we're going to get them investing in the future. So even though now we're doing the things sort of bottom up, getting bioinformaticians to, build and that, we want to end up having that top down, the government saying, okay, we're going to invest in our institutions to do bioinformatics and have national bioinformatics strategies. So that's what I want to see in the future. It's embedded into everything we do in life sciences and recognized all the way down the chain.
And I hope to see that vision realized. Very much so. So now building on that answer, obviously, we are seeing a lot of people express a huge amount of interest in bioinformatics and gaining bioinformatics skills. What advice could you give to some budding African scientists who are interested in bioinformatics? I'm going to not say young African scientists, and I'm not saying young on purpose. I'm going to say budding African scientists who want to move into bioinformatics, because I think bioinformatics can be picked up at any point in your career. And so I'm going to say budding African scientists. What advice would you give to them?
So I think my advice is go for it. It is a very exciting field. I have loved being in the field of bioinformatics. There are so many opportunities. It changes all the time. It's dynamic. It's exciting. There's just more and more data. So, the toolkits are there. The data will be there. Think about what area of bioinformatics you want to go into. Bioinformatics is huge. It's like saying biochemistry. That is anything from genes to transcripts to proteins to structures. Think about the area that you want to go into, the application, build the foundational skills. But it is a really exciting field, and I encourage everybody to go for it. You will always hopefully have a job, and there are lots of opportunities, and it is the end point of every experiment, but it's the key part of every experiment. So you would be, the most important person, I believe, in an experiment. So yeah, join the club.
I concur. Join the club. It's an exciting one.
Yeah.
Okay, so Professor Mulder, your interview will be released on July 6th, which is a very special day for PAPERI. It's actually PAPERI's birthday. So as PAPERI celebrates another year of championing genomics and precision medicine across Africa, would you kindly share a message to mark the occasion, perhaps a wish to PAPERI and to every other initiative working to advance genomics and to improve health outcomes for African populations?
Sure. Well, firstly, congratulations to PAPERI for your anniversary and your birthday. And congratulations on all that you have achieved. You know, these networks often are brought about by people who just are volunteers. You know, they're not paid to do this. They do this because they believe in something. And if you believe in it, you will make it happen. So to you and all those networks out there, every little step, every little contribution is contributing towards you know, a bigger picture. So always look at that big picture. And I completely admire everything that these networks do, because it's important that genomic medicine, that bioinformatics gets to everybody. African populations deserve to be treated in the same, you know, most appropriate manner that every other population does. So we need to build that genomic medicine. We need to build the skills. We need to empower African scientists to do their own genomics. And so every network and collaboration, particularly like PAPERI, that are pushing this and striving towards this are contributing to that kind of huge vision, which I think is extremely important. So I applaud you for all that you do.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for joining us and sharing your remarkable journey and impactful work and vision for genomics and bioinformatics in Africa. It's been a complete privilege to hear your insights, your thoughts, your advice. We hope that you've also enjoyed the session of the PAPERI Bright Minds series. These conversations obviously aim to spotlight thought leaders and pioneers such as yourself who are shaping the future of science, health, and education across the continent and beyond. And to everybody else who will be watching this recording, don't forget to follow PAPERI on social media for updates on upcoming events, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.